Hello and welcome to another Entopy webcast. In today's session, we're going to be talking about the CEO problem. So this is a phrase that we use in our white paper to describe essentially the systemic fragility of an operation or an organization, which is where unified intelligence should be targeted. So I'm very lucky to be joined by our CDO, Sohrab Iravani, and our Head of Business Development, James Human. And we'll dive into this topic. We'll talk about what we mean by a CEO problem, how you can find it, how you can find your CEO problem, where to begin, because of course we're talking about the big part, the fundamental aspect of your organization. So deploying a unified intelligence layer across that is no mean feat. So where do you start? Where do you begin? And of course, we will naturally then dive into how an iterative deployment model works. And we'll close by how you can gain buy-in across an organization throughout that process. So that's if you like, the sort of agenda today. Before we get into it, I just want to make a couple of recommendations or flag a couple of things. So the white paper, the Unified Intelligence white paper, is now live across all of our platforms. So it's free and easy to download from our website. I'd really recommend that people do that. It's a comprehensive explanation of what unified intelligence is, why it matters, how you can adopt it as an organization, what life looks like once you have adopted unified intelligence. And this is fundamentally not an Entopy promo document. This is about thinking about AI in a slightly different way and giving you an idea of how it should exist or live inside your organization. So well worth a read. And separately, we have a newsletter that goes out every month. And within that newsletter, we have links to webcasts like this. We have links to recent blogs, any events that we're attending and so on. So I'd recommend, again, if you get a chance, to sign up to that, to register that. But for now and for today, let's dive into the CEO problem. How are you guys doing? All good?
Yeah, it's been a good start to the day.
And it's your first webcast, James.
It's my first webcast.
This is the first time you're here.
Good thought to it.
Yeah, well, it's a meaty topic. It's a meaty topic. And to be honest, I think the first place that we need to start is what we mean by the CEO problem. Now, I think it's important to say that we don't mean it in a literal sense, right? So a CEO is juggling many different things across an organization. Okay, we're using the phrase because this is the most fundamental point of any organization. So it's the fundamental kind of systemic thing that determines whether you have a good day or a bad day. It can be identified by the thing that always rears its head. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a crisis moment. It could be if you're a traffic port, if you're a ferry port, it could be the fact that congestion is the CEO problem. That is the thing that we know. If we don't get that right, then the entire operation is going to fail. Likewise with other types of operations, there will be systemic fragilities that go all the way through them. But to start today's webcast, I would like to come to each of you and just ask you to kind of explain in your own words what the CEO problem means to you. So Sohrab, perhaps if I could start with you.
Of course, yeah. So every organization, well, with the ones that we've worked with, we go in and we learn from them to figure out what that CEO problem is. That could be, so a CEO problem is an event, I see it, an event or a delayed decision that's been made that has knock-on effects that could be very significant or even small, but at the end it leads to loss of revenue, loss of whatever that business considers as a loss, if that makes sense.
And it's a kind of continuous thing, isn't it? It's something that's not a point in time. It's a continuous fragility.
Yeah, because if that isn't addressed, that loss will keep happening over and over again. So as an example, I think giving examples is best.
Yeah,
sort of thing.
100%.
So working with one of our clients, we went in, we learned, from them what their business considered a loss of revenue, for example, and they considered loss of revenue is if a vessel wasn't berthing at their port, and they were losing it to a different port, and that they considered that as a loss of revenue. Then we worked with them to learn from them why they thought what they thought we could do to resolve these issues. And then once we've gathered all of that information, and what we do as a team here, we sit down and we kind of figure, what is the best solution for this? I'm moving on a bit. I'm moving on to the next stage. But the CEO problem, again, is a delayed decision. It's a constraint that isn't acted upon quick enough, that has major knock-on effects. That's what I see it.
Out. And I suppose
and it's ongoing.
And it's interesting that you kind of start from almost how to identify it by what are the costs of the business that lead you back to what that systemic fragility is.
Exactly, because for most businesses it's cost, especially if they're, you know,
but it could be cost of reputation.
Exactly, it could be anything, but majority of businesses it is a cost of revenue, because everyone, you know, is in business to make money. So,
And James, from your perspective, so you've got a slightly different perspective than Sohrab. It's obviously more on the kind of delivery and technical side. From your world, speaking to customers and learning about their problems and so on, what does the CEO problem as Entopy kind of positions it? What does it mean to you?
I guess it's a high consequence disruption within that appears consistently, whether it be day by day or week by week, something that is forever rearing its head and materially impacting the success and operations of the organisation. I think you touched on it yourself, Sohrab. It doesn't have to be a big thing. The disruption could be a matter of 5 minutes, but the impact and the network effect of that cascading through the value chain ultimately realises itself as a much more material and significant problem, which is CEO level. So what starts as a potentially insignificant problem, actually, when you trace it forwards, it is more material.
It's the fundamental, what is our business built on? And if our business is built on facilitating vessels to arrive in a port, or our business is built on delivering energy to people's homes, what are the things that disrupt that? Because that is the ultimate job of the business. That is the purpose. That is the reason the business exists. And I think that's the starting point, is the fragilities within that we talk about as the CEO level problem. So the next part is, how do we find it? Now, Sohrab, you already kind of touched on this in terms of maybe working back from what's your biggest cost? What are you scared of? When you come into work today as a C-suite typically, or a head of, or a senior person within the organization, when you're coming into work today, what is your biggest fear? What is the thing that you know is going to disrupt your month, your year, your day, your week, and work backwards from there? James, you spoke about these problems perhaps being almost insignificant when you start to drill into what's behind the cost. Sometimes it's not a blindingly obvious or really material thing that is actually the problem. I mean, so actually using examples, the customer you're talking about, we started with the cost is skip vessel calls. And then we went through a series of steps where we actually said, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. And actually the systemic fragility was resource constraints across an ecosystem. But maybe you could talk through that.
Yeah, definitely. The thing is, this we call it a CEO problem because at the end of the day, it will affect the whole organization eventually. Even like James said, if not at the beginning, but it will eventually. And the reason we went through all of those layers is because the CEO may not have visibility through every single stakeholder because it's such a big organization. So they may be seeing it as like the issue from a strategic point of view, making bigger decisions, less like because they can spend the most money, make the bigger, bolder decisions. But maybe that's not the case. When you drill down, you can resolve those issues by just allowing better communication between stakeholders, you know, but the CEO doesn't get that visibility at the top. So this is what we do. So when we started our discussions with this client, what we did was, okay, what is the goal? Loss of revenue. Why? Okay, what do you think? Again, we were speaking with senior levels, so they would assume bigger, bolder decisions. We need to buy more equipment, make bigger changes to the channels, because that's just normal. We don't disregard that. We investigate that. We worked through the stakeholders. We developed the intelligence digital twin. And then we started interacting with the whole port digitally. Started finding constraints, finding alerts, allowing a better communication between stakeholders. And we got to some conclusions. Okay, if there's better communication here, if there's better insight before an event is due to occur because of AI predictions, this could resolve many of the issues. And we don't need to spend money on bolder decisions yet. Or maybe those bolder decisions and funds can be saved to improve the overall port at a later time.
And each layer that we peeled back exposed a different angle or a different perspective of the overarching fragility. And that overarching fragility is now what the unified intelligence layer sits across.
Of course, yeah.
James, from your point of view, so I think that's a really, really important perspective about how we start with what is the cost. So what area of the business am I looking at? But then the fact that area, because it's a CEO problem, touches every area. So it starts here, it's like a house fire, for lack of a better phrase. And then gradually, as you've gone through that process of just unpicking and unearthing, what this ecosystem looks like or what this system looks like, we can start to expose different fragilities. But from your point of view, when you're right at the top of one of these conversations, so that's kind of post, we've gone and done it. When we're right at the top of one of these conversations, you've got quite a neat technique actually of putting these kind of steel men in front of people, or the straw man, or whatever we call it. Yeah. Maybe you could talk through that and what the purpose of those are.
Yeah, I think the point of the steel man is that we acknowledge that we are not the domain experts when we're having these conversations with new partners and prospects. Like, the dynamic between Entopy and a partner is that they are the domain expert and we are the data experts. And in collaboration, we can work together to solve their CEO problem. Just to sort of build on some of what Sohrab has said earlier around peeling back the layers. One of the more sort of, I guess, quite rudimentary, but one of the tools I learned in my early career was the 5 whys, which is sort of what we're getting at. So this is your big challenge, this is your problem. Right, why? And they give you the next answer. Okay, so why does that happen? And then they give you the answer to that. So the ship has arrived late in the port. Why? Because pilotage wasn't ready. Why? Because tugboats weren't ready, etc., etc. But I guess in terms of the steel mans, they are used as an antagonist, an illustrator, a conversation starter to basically lubricate the conversation and sort of dig into their understanding. So it will be very top level, but I will maybe overlay where they may have data across their organization and how they might typically model it at the moment, and sort of then, like you say, have a look at, okay, well, if we specifically modeled this component of your business versus this component of your business and how they interact with one another, what story would that tell that is different to a singular model across your entire network, etc. So I guess the steel mans are just a useful tool to sort of provoke.
Provoke, tease it. I think you said there's a couple of threads in what you've just said there that I'd just like to pull on. So the first one that you mentioned was, we're not the domain experts. And this came up in the last webcast that we did together. Really, really, really important, right? So the CEO problem has to come from the organization, right? This is potentially a non-obvious to the outside world, non-obvious kind of fundamental, critical process, backbone of operations and organizations. So you need to have deep domain expertise, not just in maritime shipping, but in the specific port that we're dealing with. Right, so the fact that it has to come from them is a really important point. It doesn't have to come from the CEO, by the way, either. The CEO problem is just a phrase we use, and I'm going to continue to repeat that. Again, it's antagonistic, but it has to come from within the organization. So the idea of the steel man is to, first of all, kind of create a kind of common understanding. So we'll put it up and say, this is what we think your operation looks like based on our research. Tell us where it's wrong. Hence the term steel man. It's supposed to be attacked. And then through that process, gradually you start to tease bits of information out. Now, what's interesting is we do have to guide that conversation. Even though we're not the domain experts, we're not looking for the obvious things, are we? So sometimes, like the conversation we had this morning, the guy's talking to us about his operation and his world. You're sitting there going, okay, that's really good. I get what you're saying, but we want to know about this bit. Go to this layer. We have to guide a little bit, don't we?
Yeah, I think if we move on to like, how do we begin?
Yeah.
That this is exactly it. So if we just listen, we have to listen. But if we just listen, the organization wants to tell us everything in one go.
Yeah.
And that is very overwhelming because could you imagine an port operation? It's taken hundreds of years. We can't possibly do that in a meeting. So I think this is another thing that makes us very different to anyone else is we start small, specific, trying to kind of prove the value in the most important sector of that business. Mm-hmm. So one of the challenges, again, they tell us what their challenges are and how they could avoid losing revenue, for example. And we concentrate on that. We learn everything about that single issue from them. And then at the end, we decide how the technology will lead to that solution.
Yeah. And it's about, and the other part of this, and you've basically said this, but it's about starting narrow. So it's about kind of doing that to an extent, but we can't take all of that information in. So this is a process, and this doesn't happen in one meeting. But it's a process of transferring domain knowledge to us ingesting that and understanding it, and then identifying that narrow substrate, isn't it? It's about where is the opportunity for us to deploy. And again, the steel man sometimes alludes to some of these things, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I mean, the ecosystem we work across are never single stakeholder either, so you've got that factor to consider in.
Yeah.
I tend to, outside of the steel mans, there are more day-to-day considerations where you can draw some parallels in terms of where you might start with a narrow substrate and build iteratively to have a more significant impact longer term. So if I'm trying to get myself in shape, lose a bit of weight, I can track my macros, I can track my calories, I can wear an Oura ring or a smartwatch. But it's a lot to do all at once, and most people fail in a new plan when they try to take it all on from the start. Essentially, I guess the parallel here is that rather than trying to track my macros at the same time as getting my steps in, at the same time as doing an ice bath every day or whatever it might be, and I've gone off on a tangent here, I realise.
So good.
But if I start purely by getting my 10,000 steps a day in, then it's an easier process to then, right, I've hit my 10,000 steps a day. The next thing I do is get to 2,500 calories. The next thing I do is make sure I get my 8 hours sleep. If I try and do it all at once, I'm likely to fail. I guess it's the same principle as to narrow substrate deployment and iterative.
And the question then becomes, what is that narrow substrate? But if I think about all of the deployments that we have done, no one's ever 100%, right, we identify the systemic fragility. Now, 9 times out of 10, that we get to that point pretty quickly, to be honest, right? Not 9 times out of 10, when we're talking to operators, when we're talking to innovation teams, it becomes quite clear what the overarching systemic fragility is. Is it orchestration of resources? Is it operating within resource-constrained infrastructure? Is it interacting with resource-constrained infrastructure? Is it dynamic resource planning? You can typically start to bucket these things quite well. But then the real trick is, where do I start? And I don't think anyone that we've ever worked with has been dead set that this is 100% the right place to be. If they knew that was the subset of the overarching systemic fragility that was the problem, we wouldn't be at the table. So back to the customer, they knew they wanted to avoid missed vessel calls, and we started with towage. And they thought that was where the problem was. And as things have moved on, yes, it's part of the problem, but we've also identified other areas as we've expanded the model, haven't we? Yeah. And I think what's really important is that substrate, even if that was wrong, I mean, we did another one with traffic to a ferry port. We started with a particular type of traffic. I mean, that was a bit easier to identify what the substrate was. I suppose the point I'm trying to make is this is not wasted time, because we are still building a very important part of the world model, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. Again, because this intelligence is always on and ongoing, it means innovation is always ongoing as well, side by side. And this is why we have our forward deployed engineers, because we need to be there from day one all the way through forever with them to innovate, because operational decisions change over time. They may decide on new regulations, government regulations, things change on a constant basis. So we have to always be there to kind of address those changes. That's
and I think,
to your point.
Exactly. And I suppose my point that I'm trying to sort of stress is like, find the CEO problem, the systemic fragility that you want to deploy unified intelligence into. And then the narrow substrate conversation, it does require a lot of thought. It requires a lot of deep thought, but it's not something that you should really, really dwell on, because it's part of a journey. So just because you've decided to start here doesn't mean to say that we don't find the actual root of 90% of the failures isn't over here, but you have to start somewhere.
Just to add on that, when we go in to build the digital copy of that operation, we build that regardless of what we believe that solution, the solution is. So we may on side by side start going down the route where we believe the solution is. If we're wrong, it doesn't mean we've wasted any time, because we still need to create that operational copy. We can pivot quickly and move in a different direction to find the solution.
And even the pivot is just building on top of what you've already got.
Exactly.
So there is no wasted, because we're building a world model of their business, or a digital copy, a digital
It's
twin.
a must. It's a must.
It's a must.
Yeah.
But there are some smart things that you can do in deciding where to begin. So, for example, if there is a decision, like there was, about a financial or capital investment in a particular thing, makes sense to start there. If it's very, very obvious that you've got this particular substrate of the operation that you think is a little bit more volatile than others, because maybe the others are, the planning is a little bit more binary, maybe they're pre-booked in ferry traffic cases and the other ones turn up and go, you can find more obvious areas to start, right? That's just logical. I suppose building on that point and talking to the expansion, the forward deployed engineers and so on and so forth, it's this ability to iteratively deploy. And this is where micro models is a massive aspect, isn't it, James? So the ability to kind of continuously add on.
Continuously add on and prove value early is another core component of the micro model, sort of an agile approach that we take. So, it's no secret that a high proportion of innovation projects don't necessarily get off the ground. And by and large, that can be because they're trying to take on too much from day one, or they're not addressing a genuine problem that exists in the ecosystem, but they're sort of maybe trying to adopt an innovation to show that they're innovative. So by sort of starting with that high value sort of targeted substrate and develop it in sort of in stages, it means you can get value early, get the trust from the senior leadership team, the operational buy-in that allows you to expand. If you don't get the front end right, the rest of it doesn't materialize.
And you've got the forward deployed engineers there, the ability to deploy and expand iteratively. Nothing you do in that first deployment is wasted. Hopefully it's answering a very, very important question anyway, and you gradually move forward. And to your point around getting to value quickly, it starts to build trust. And that's a key thing that we've noticed as we deploy iteratively about gaining trust from the organization, right? So each step of the way, it gives someone confidence that, this technology will work for their environment. It might be they questioned whether they've got enough data for it. It might be they question the technology, right? And we've been through this process. You've spoken to so many people that perhaps are scared of AI, or maybe they're skeptical around its efficacy, or maybe they're skeptical around we don't have enough data to deploy AI, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit more around that journey.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, like you said, there's multiple layers onto that trust for different stakeholders. More senior roles. The trust factor is whether this is going to help them across their organization. And that comes when we start to meet those challenges.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And then we move down the line. Let's go to operators, for example. They're skeptical because this is a brand new tool that has been deployed. They're thinking, is this going to help us? Is this going to replace us? What is this going to do? So that's where we go in to gain their trust by listening to them and finding out what that layer of stakeholder challenge is. Try to accommodate them as well, working with them so they feel a little bit of like, I would like an ownership to that technology, and also just showing them that this is a tool to help you make faster decisions that will cause those knock-on effects we spoke about. And that's how we're kind of operating right now.
It makes it tangible. It helps to build trust, and right the way throughout the organization, different people need different things to build that trust. Final point before we close. If I'm an organization, I've identified my CEO problem, I've identified my systemic fragility. I know that using AI to orchestrate resources across complex operations is my thing. I'm currently going through a process of trying to identify what the narrow substrate is. I've seen two things happen. Either organizations work with organizations like us and they start with the narrow substrate and they gradually build up, or they try and put everything into a tender document and they go out for tender. Which one's right, James?
I guess to some degree there isn't a categoric right answer. We obviously see the advantages to our approach and method, and when you're in an environment where we're going from 0 to 1 rather than 1 to n, and deploying a brand new frontier technology rather than just developing on something they already have in their environment,
You have to go iteratively.
you have to go iteratively. Yeah.
The tender document works if you know exactly what you want.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's the way that typical procurement processes. Digital twin is one of these technologies that can fall into typical procurement processes. Typical procurement processes for infrastructure are tender documents, systems requirements, detailed list of systems requirements. Someone will bid against those system requirements. And if anything changes, price changes, right? And that is the typical way of procuring something. That is fine if you're building a CRM. That is fine if you're building a mainframe back in the day. That is fine if you're putting all of your systems onto new cloud infrastructure. If you are trying to implement a unified intelligence layer or AI orchestration or decision intelligence or neurosymbolic AI, whatever you want to call this, if that's what you're deploying into your organization to get that edge, the only way is iteratively, because you said it, you're going from 0 to 1, not 1 to n.
Yeah, because there's a learning curve to it.
Yeah.
You know, you can't put down what you need on paper at day one. You just can't do that with this sort of technology.
No.
It's a learning curve for the organization and for us working with that organization.
Because, yeah, exactly, and the world model is that organization, right? This isn't something that you just lift and shift and take from a different organization. So guys, we'll bring it to an end there. Thank you both very, very much for your time. Couple of final things to mention. There are many of these webcasts now starting to appear on our website, YouTube channels, various other social media channels. So really, I'd encourage you to, go and watch these. If you've watched this and you've enjoyed it, you've enjoyed some of the conversation, we've got webcasts on unified intelligence, micro models, synthetic data, always on intelligence, etc. The AI agent. There's loads of content there. We've also got shorts, we've got, unified intelligence white papers and so on and so forth. So we're trying to provide as much knowledge to you all, and hopefully you all find this useful and it leads to a new era of how we adopt AI and how it lives and exists in real world complex operational environments. Thank you very much for listening.